yeah, you get to a point where you don't dare look up. It's that way on stage too, though. You do get to a certain level, and hey, good morning. They're checking my mic. Obviously, it's working, right?
Good morning. I don't like being in the spotlight. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for coming. And let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for the many, many, many blessings you've given us. Today we think of the weather that on the 10th of October isn't generally this warm, and we appreciate that. We appreciate this church. We appreciate the people who work here, the people who do the behind-the-scenes things, and the people who are up front. And today we especially appreciate Mary Martin and Dan Stoughton and look forward to what they have to say. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. I know neither one of these two needs introduction, but because that's what we do here, I'm going to give you a very little introduction. Chris and Mary have been, and Chris is over here. I'm not sure everybody knows Chris, but Chris and Mary have been members here since '97, and Mary has served as lead elder, pastoral care elder, care and connection elder, and on the personnel committee. And I know Chris has done many of the same things here. Mary's currently a member of the prayer committee that focuses on creating a culture of prayer here at our church. Her business, she only gave me the initials, PSG, is now in its 31st year. It's a corporate training and development company that helps organizations master the art of working together. Come Home Alive is her first book and written to help others make it through the crisis of cancer together. She is, well, and I thought today you might have been in Chicago running the marathon. It is that day. She's an avid reader, runner, golf enthusiast, and football fan. Chris and Mary have been married 38 years. They have 3 adult sons and 1 7-year-old granddaughter. Dan, you know, he says, very humble man, great storyteller, and we're excited to hear about their writing process and what went into writing these 2 books. So thank you very much again for coming, and we'll give the floor to them. And the mic.
Well, good morning. Nice to have you here. Mary and I have some questions that we're going to kind of bounce off of. At any time during this, if you raise your hand, we may ignore you, but it's only because we can't see you because the lights are bright. So wave back and forth, and we'll stop and try to answer your questions at that time. Otherwise, at the end, we'll ask a couple of questions, but we're really going to start with, why do you write, Mary? So why don't you just tell us why you write?
Well, thank you all for inviting me. I know this was something that has been in the works for a little while, so I really appreciate being together today with Dan, talking about this book that I just published this year, and Dan has a couple books that he's published, and so it was a good conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago, and the conversation really started with, why do you write? And I hadn't pondered that very much before, and so this gave me a reason to really think about that. And so what surfaced from that pondering is, I think I really write because I believe it stems from understanding my spiritual gifts. And I went through the network program here at Christ Memorial many, many years ago, probably right when we first joined the church. But I found out that I have a spiritual gift of faith. And so faith is a gift to have confidence to believe. People with this gift believe the promises of God and inspire others to do the same. I don't think of myself very much as inspirational, but over the last few years, with Chris in my situation, he's now on his second journey with throat cancer, I asked myself, well, why not me? And why shouldn't I be inspiring to others as they're maybe going through some of this same journey? Maybe not the exact situation, but we all have journeys that we go through. So faith. My second spiritual gift is intercession. And this is a gift really to plead on behalf of others. People with this gift are compelled to earnestly pray for others. And I think anything that I write is really going to be centered around prayer. I know that. Third gift is wisdom. And my spiritual gift of wisdom really allows me to apply truth practically. So people with this gift apply spiritual truth in very specific and practical ways. My fourth spiritual gift is discernment. And this is a gift to separate, to really see perspective and distinguish truth from error, right from wrong, what motives are real, what motives might not be real. And then my last spiritual gift is knowledge. To know, people with this gift organize information for teaching and for practical use, and they search the scripture for insight, understanding, and truth. So I really think at the heart of that question really focuses on those 5 spiritual gifts. And what I think I want to do is, I call it extract the precious. And some of you may have done Bible study groups with that same name, extract the precious. I want to extract the precious out of some of those readings that I have come into being aware of, and then potentially pass that on to others. That's why I write.
Okay, good. Well, for me, as a pastor, you get an opportunity to write every week. You write a sermon, you write a Sunday school class. That became part of my routine. Eventually, I got connected with some people at Zondervan's and Baker and was invited to write some commentaries. I wrote a master's dissertation and a doctoral dissertation, both of which were published. How many of you have read that? One more and it would be one. Nobody reads those kinds of things, The only people who read commentaries are preachers. And at some point I thought, all of that writing, but nobody really looks at it, I wrote a kind of a summary of my family, some of the people that were influential in my life for my kids. Happened to show it to a friend of mine who was an editor, and he said, "You need to turn this into a novel." I said, "Well, I've never written any fiction." He said, "Well, turn it into a novel." Well, after a lot of prayer and a lot of trying, I put together that story, added an awful lot to it, and took some things away from it. And that's The Gate. And really, I wrote that book originally for my kids, but as I put The Gate together, I wrote that for the world. I feel like a preacher's job is to be in that thin space. If you want to look at the second novel, that's where the title comes from. There's a thin space between heaven and hell, between heaven and earth, between God and us, between faith and doubt. And as I was thinking about that thin space between heaven and earth, I thought to myself, in many respects, that's the job of the pastor, to represent the people to God and to represent God to the people. And I think I'm more effective at reaching an audience with stories than I am with deep theological truths. And so people will sometimes say, well, all he does is tell stories, and they would be right. So that's why I write. So tell me, how do you write? That's a bigger question.
That is really a big question, because I don't really consider myself to be a writer at all. I've been in the business of corporate training and development for, probably close to 40 years. So I do a lot of stand-up presentation skills, stand-up team building work, just stand-up talking, ad-libbing, improvising. And being with you right now, that's kind of what my work is. So I really don't consider myself to be a writer at all. However, my father said something to me many, many years ago. It was pretty close to right before he died. But if one of your parents said this to you, it would make you sit up and take notice. And he said to me, Mary, while you are yet living, find out what the Lord wants you to know. And that little word yet, oh my goodness, when your father says something like that to you, while you are yet living, find out what the Lord wants you to know. Just kind of stuck in my craw. Now, Leslie has said it would be probably likely I might not be here because the Chicago Marathon is running today. I don't run marathons anymore, but I have run 8 in my life, and I've actually run 5 Chicago marathons. One with my son, which was extremely memorable. But how do I write? I would say that being in a physical activity like running really instills some ideas and some thoughts for me. So how do I write? Well, I start with a word. And I'll hear a word, I'll read a word, I'll see a word, and that word becomes real to me. So right now, a word that I'm really focused on is real. And then I'm focused on other words that start with R-E. And there's a lot of them, believe you me. Restoration is one of them. There's a lot of beautiful R-E words: reliance, rely, restore, restoration, resolve. Oh my goodness. It's like when you see for women, when you see someone who's pregnant, you just now see a lot of pregnant people. Well, once I started on this word real, now all of a sudden I'm seeing R-E words everywhere. I mean, they're just everywhere. So I'll start with a word or a concept, and then I want to play off of that. And the most helpful is when I get out and run. And so I have to be disciplined to get out and run, and I'll go run, and then all of a sudden it seems to formulate. And then my biggest deal is I have to go into the house and write it down, because otherwise the train of thought is lost. So I have to be totally disciplined to write down those simple phrases that seemed to surface while I was running. And then I just start with those. I start plunking away. I have to write on a pad of paper. I have to do it in a physical way. The computer, even though the computer is out there, I must start in a physical way. It's the physical writing of it and me being able to see it on the paper that really formulates the concept, I would say. And from there, then I'll take those words, maybe those simple phrases, and then try to expand on it. When I was writing this book, because I'm not that disciplined, and Chris knows it, I had a little sticky note where I would write the number of words. At the bottom, you can see on the computer, you can see the number of words that you've written. So when I was writing this book, I would write down on a little sticky note the date, and then I would put 13,463 words. And so then that little sticky note was what was kind of an impetus to me to continue to keep writing and writing and writing and expressing what I wanted to share.
Well, for me, writing, there are 2 pieces of that. One is writing sermons. I don't preach a sermon I've preached before. If you would go back and listen to the sermons I preached at community, you might hear a story that I said before, but I found that when I go back and try to take a message that I wrote before, I wrote it for a particular time, I wrote it for a particular audience, I wrote it for a particular reason, and to redo it, it just doesn't feel right to me. And so every message I write from scratch, and I'm very disciplined about writing. I do all my writing after I go home from work. So Carol and I have dinner. Sometimes we take a walk or talk, then I start writing. I usually quit writing 9 or 10. Sometimes it's 2 in the morning. But I know what's coming Sunday, and I have to be ready. And so I have to write this stuff out. And I try to get out a few weeks ahead of where I am so that I can talk to musicians and that kind of stuff about how they might tie into the message. When I write books, that's something else. There, my practice is I try to notice situations, and then I write a line or two, and I put it in a file. I'll give you some of the lines that really were part of the impetus for writing the last novel. Ever since Adam and Eve were exiled from Eden, we've all had this hunger to belong. I felt like when I wrote that line, one of the big problems in the world is insecurity. People always feel like they don't belong. God stands with his arms at the end of the driveway, wide open, wanting to welcome all of us prodigals home, but we don't feel like we belong. Another line I wrote was this: grief doesn't change who we are, it reveals who we are. And then in this book, there's a character who loses his wife. He's wrestling with how does he talk to his children, his child, about that. And I wrote this line: the scariest monsters live in our heads, not under our beds. That whole chapter then revolves around this little girl thinking there's somebody under her bed. You've all, as parents, experienced that with your children. They're afraid something's in the closet or something's under the bed. And usually the things that frighten us the most are the things that are in our minds. And so I write these lines, and then I kind of save them and put them in a file, and eventually I get back to that, and I write a whole lot more than you'll ever see. Every sermon, when I have about twice as much material as I need, then I put it down, and I leave it alone for a couple of days, and then I go back to it, and I ask God to give me what he thinks I ought to say that week. There was a time in my life when I would write it, and then I would sit down with Carol, and I would say, what do you think? And one Sunday, I preached a message. We were at Woodhaven in those days, and there was something she said not to say, and I said it anyway. Usually I don't do what she doesn't want me to do, but I did then. And afterwards, a woman came up to her, first time she'd been in that church, and she somehow heard that Carol was the pastor's wife, and she was just sobbing and said to her, you need to tell him that's what I needed to hear today. And so she said, I'm not going to read anything you write until it's done. When you wrote the end, at the end of a book, I'll read it. Otherwise, I don't want to read any of it, and I don't want to see your sermons. So it was always my practice at Community to sit with a group of people in the middle of the week and have them look at the large thing that I've written, and they can take it apart, give me suggestions, and sometimes they say, I wouldn't say that at all, and I say it anyway, but for the most part, I try to make it a corporate sermon, and we're trying to get there a little bit now with Dave and Steve and Mike and I, the four of us, talk about messages and talk about the direction we should take it, and so it's kind of a group process.
Well, this book that I wrote, Come Home Alive, is really about our journey together, Chris and mine. Basically, over the last 8 years, he was diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer back in 2013. And the book is really about making it through, getting down off the mountain, coming home alive. And when Chris read it for the first time, he finished it and he looked up at me. He says, who is this Chris guy? Because in the very beginning, I had just said Chris, and I didn't say my husband, Chris. So that was leading into some of the editing, there's some things that you really need to take a look at, and that was one of them. That was his first reaction. I really wrote this book, I would say, for 4 reasons. We did make it through, and we still are making it through. And that's what I want people to know, is you can make it through. And I wanted to give people hope. That, I think, is the first reason. Second reason I really wrote the book is for caregivers. And we are coming up onto November is Caregiver Month, National Caregiver Month. And if you know any caregiver out there that is giving care to someone, a parent, a spouse, a child, anyone, take an extra moment, put your arm around them if they want you to in this environment, but just really thank them. I actually got a note from Rob Pocock here in our church, and it is something that I will cherish forever. It was a handwritten note that he sent to me and said, I have admired from afar your extraordinary efforts as you and Chris travel this road. And I will tell you, I open that note up every now and then when we have some rough news. So I will just encourage you to do that. Third reason why I wrote the book is really about helping relationships everywhere. If you read the book, you know that I refer to Life of Pi. Who's in your boat? You know, are you in the boat with Richard Parker, a Bengal tiger that wants to pounce on you? Well, sometimes our marriages are like that. And I wrote the book to really uncover some of those things and to help us to look at ways that we can really improve our relationships, but understand our relationships. And I guess the last reason I wrote the book is to really bring awareness to this type of cancer, and to look at ways that we can, because it is an epidemic cancer, and to bring awareness to it. But behind it all, I think most important is sharing our faith and sharing the love of Jesus. I mean, your sermon just played so incredibly well into kind of the whole meaning of what I wanted to get across today. If we invite Jesus into our hearts, whether you live or whether you die, you will come home alive.
So who's your audience?
Well, I think my audience is anybody that's going through any kind of trial, anybody that's going through any illness. We say that health, finances, and relationships are the big 3 in our lives. And help us, Lord, if we're going through all 3 at the same time, because that is a heavy burden to bear. Chris and I are going through health issues. The Lord has spared us from finance and relationship issues. But if you're going through all 3 of those, you need a little bit of a lift. You need some inspiration. I would say that's my audience. Obviously, cancer is a biggie. It is the emperor of all maladies. The sad thing with cancer is a child born today, 1 in every 2, male or female, will receive a diagnosis of cancer in their lifetime, and it stops you in your tracks. So I would say my audience probably is the world from an inspirational perspective. And I just want to lift people up, and I want to bring people to Jesus. I think Martin Luther said, if you want to change the world, pick up a pen and write. And so I've taken that to heart a little bit, especially around relationships. So I think if the truth be known, I would really like to help relationships for the good.
Well, for me, I would say audience-wise, it depends on what type of writing I'm doing, you know. Like I said, when I wrote commentaries, I knew who I was writing to. I was writing to pastors and teachers and trying to give them some perspective on the text. When you write sermons, the question for me is always, what do I want people to know? And what do I want people to do? Those 2 things kind of play into all of my sermon writing. But then, in addition to that, what do you want them to feel? I think the stories help us feel fear, feel anxiety, feel joy, feel the different things that God wants us to feel. And God is so relational. So much of who he is about connecting with us on a deeper level. And so I try to press that into sermons. And then when I write novels, I try to picture someone, one person. And in the first novel, it was my youngest daughter. She loves to write, and she and I have done some things together, short stories, children's stories, and things like that she's illustrated. And so in that book, I was just trying to say, okay, how do I share with Tara what my grandma was like, and what wisdom she had for the world that I can remember. In my latest novel, an awful lot of people lose their faith when they lose someone they love. And I've walked with an awful lot of people who've gone through that, and so the audience there was really people who've lost somebody and who are struggling in the midst of that. And my prayer has been, since I first started writing that book, that number one, it would bring people comfort. And then number two, that it would bring people closer to Christ. And so that was the motivation behind all of that. So now, talk to me about editing.
Well, I think I'm a novice in this whole writing cycle. Actually, I wrote the last chapter of Come Home Alive first. So I wrote the call to action first. That was kind of the impetus for the book at the time. And then I went backwards. I do not need to write a book sequentially. My makeup doesn't need me to do that. I can write a thing here and a thing there, and I can move it to here and move it to there. But when I did, I had probably 3/4 of the book done, and I hired a woman to come and work with me because I told her, I think we have 1,000 pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that are all white, and I need your help in sorting them out and putting them together and making this flow. It just felt like that to me at that point. So the editing process was a bit more difficult for me, but my first job out of college really was, I worked in a pharmacy for a while, but then I worked in a newspaper. And so I got a real good handle on proofreading. And I think I'm a really good proofreader. The only problem is when the word is instead of it, and it doesn't pick up on that right away. But I tend to rework a lot of stuff. I don't tend to leave it the same. And one of the things I like to do is pick a word. Recently I picked the word plenty. I like to pick a word, and then I'll give a sentence, and then I want to use that word again in the next paragraph. So that's been kind of somewhat of my editing process recently.
Well, whenever I write, I'm in desperate need of editors. I run off at the pen, as my wife says, and so, the first novel I wrote, when I was done with it, it was about 450 pages, and it has 245. So was there editing? An awful lot of editing. And the thing about editing for me is that they would say to me, well, you don't need that chapter. I would want to fight for that chapter. And we'd go back and forth. You fall in love with your own words. They're like your children. You don't want to just cut them out. But the goal was to make the book better. And so I tried to listen to the editors as we went along. Other times they would say to me, you need to expand this character. You need to tell more about this than what you've told. That was the easier part of editing for me. As I write, there are always these little sayings, like I said, when someone we love dies, a part of us dies too. But a part of them also lives on in us. God has blessed us with the blessing of other people. We stand on their shoulders. We hold their hands. We feel their embrace. And we know there's a God. Now, I wrote that over a long period of time. I reworded it. I chased words to find just the right word to say. And so sometimes there's a sentence or two that I'm really trying to get to. Other times I'm just unloading story, trying to fill in the blanks around some of those things. And so I don't mind if they say to me, you spelled that word wrong. I'm dyslexic. I often turn words around. Spelling and grammar are not my native language, so to speak. So I have no problem with them correcting my grammar. One of the reasons that my second novel was not published by Baker, the first novel was published by Revell, which is a division of Baker. One of the reasons my second novel wasn't published by them was because of editing. In my first novel, a man stumbles his way through. The gate is really the gate to heaven. And he gets to be in the gatehouse of heaven. And he has dinner every night with people he's loved and lost. And they kind of share some of the wisdom of the world with him there just inside the gate of heaven. And then he goes back to the earth. But one of the people that was instrumental in my life was my Uncle David. David had a world full of issues, autism, alcoholism, a lot of problems in his life. Along with that, he was gay. I was his caregiver since I was 25, which meant I would meet with him, I would take him to breakfast, would get him aftershave or toothpaste, and we just talked about life. Now, he looked at life different than I did because he lived at the Guiding Light. And in those days, you could rent a room at the Guiding Light, and he was a permanent resident there. And like I said, he struggled with a lot of things in life, but I learned an awful lot from him too. And he was gay. I explained some of that in the novel, and they cut that. They said, you can't have a gay person in heaven. And I said, well, I believe he's in heaven. I know he wrestled with his sins, and I believe we all have to wrestle with our sins. Paul says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. It doesn't say work out everybody else's salvation. And they wouldn't put that in there. They said, no, that will be a hard pill to swallow for way too much of the Christian community, and if you want to sell this book, you can't have a gay person in heaven. I wanted to get published. The truth is, this is my third novel. There are two laying in a drawer somewhere that everybody looked at and said, yeah, that's nice, no thanks. So this one I wanted to get published, so I did what they said. When I wrote the second novel, it deals with somebody who struggles with losing someone they love, and it messes with his faith for a while. Now, eventually he comes back to faith, but when I first presented that manuscript, I was told, well, this is a little too harsh. We're going to have to soften this a little bit. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to soften it. It is what it is. It's extremely hard to lose someone you love. And yes, God will get us through it. And yes, our faith carries us. But that doesn't mean we're not going to have really, really bad days. And that was the end of the meeting. So editors have a right to help us make it better. But in the end, it's got to be our call, what we say and what we do, and then we rise or fall with those words. So that's That's the editing
In
process.
Come Home Alive, there is a chapter that's missing. Well, there's probably 2 or 3 chapters that are missing. One of the chapters was called Come Home, There's Blood Everywhere. And that did not make it into the book. I tried to rewrite it as well as I could to meet their quality standards for the quality review. But no matter what I did, I wasn't going to forfeit the actual event because it was pretty paramount to our whole circumstances. And I couldn't rewrite it in a way that they would agree with and accept. So I decided, okay, I'm just going to toss that out. And if somebody asked me to talk about it, well, then I'll read that chapter. And I read it at Rotary because it had a lot. I think maybe Warren was there. It had something to do with a Rotary meeting as well, because I was at a Rotary meeting when Chris texted me and said, come home right away, there's blood everywhere. So yes, they sometimes take out things that we don't feel are even, from my perspective, that didn't feel harsh at all. But from their perspective, it did. So then I had to take out some adjoining chapters that mention that particular situation. That was tough. So you have to go back. I bet you I read the book 40 times while I was rewriting it before they approved it. That part can be tedious.
Yeah. For me, the thin space was over 500 pages when I originally submitted the manuscript. Deb Haggerty, who's the head editor at the publishing company in Boston that published it, said to me, we're going to have to find a way to trim this a little bit. You do know that, right? I said, I know that, but I'm going to fight for certain things. She said, you fight for the things that matter to you. And she said, ultimately, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. If you hear what I have to say, I'll hear what you have to say. And it was a great process, really. One of the things that I do when I write is I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how it's going to end. I start writing, and then I discover the story as I write. It's fiction. And so people will say to me, oh, yeah, do you have a brother? I'm like, no, I don't have a brother. They're like, well, in your book, your brother. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I just always wished I had a brother. So I start writing, and then I go off on tangents. There was a section where one of the people in the thin space has surgery, and I started writing about the doctor. Well, I love to do research, and so, if you want to have a happy day with me, it's not with all of you. I'm sorry. I like to be all alone in a room with a bunch of books and a computer, and I just sit in there and look things up. So I started doing research on surgeons and this particular type of surgery and how they might have gotten their background, and found out that, probably the best of those surgeons learned this in the field in military circumstances. So I wrote this long thing, about 20 pages about this surgeon. And the editor said to me, we could say this in about 2 lines. I said, but there's all that great research. She said, that helped you write those 2 lines. That's what you need to know. So, how about writer's block? Did you ever get to a point where you just said, I can't write today?
Oh, yeah. Now, you, Dan, you write way late into the night.
Yes.
My best writing time is 3 o'clock in the morning. So while you're just signing off, my light is turning on. I think one of the things that has helped me is figuring out where is the best environment for me to write, and figuring out the place. And it's turned out that I can write at home, and I can write with my home computer, and I can write in my little office storage room, laundry room. So that I have a laundry room, storage room in our condo, and the laundry is over here, the storage is over here, and my computer is right here, and I can write there. But yes, writer's block is, I'm not under any gun. I've never been under any gun. This is a self-published book, so I've never been under any kind of a deadline. I don't know that I would be very good at that, because I think that would force me into, you got to get up and you got to write 1,000 words or 10,000 words or something like that to satisfy the publisher and the deadline. My writing is pretty sporadic, and I guess it's unstructured and a bit segmented, so it doesn't, there's not this flow except for this book. Right now, if you want to catch any more writing, I'm writing maybe once a week on our Caring Bridge for Chris, to really update people about his current health status, where things are, what new things we've emerged. And that has really been a great way for me to kind of minimize writer's block, because I feel like I owe this audience, there's now about 300 people that follow it. I feel like I owe this audience something once every 10 days, is kind of how I feel about it. So it's not every day, but I want to update them, and I want to give them some words of hope and words of encouragement. Not only because they've prayed so diligently for us for many years, but because I think there are some things that are going on in each of our lives. And sometimes it's really great when someone else is going through it. It's like, 80% of us are glad other people are having problems. So I think sometimes that's a good thing when you're having some problems and you write about it and you can be open and honest about it. And then, like the woman that came up to you afterwards, that's just simply what I need to know. So often people will share with me on that, Mary, that's exactly what I needed to hear today.
Yeah, for me, I got used to, when I was doing commentary work, having deadlines, and so when I would get writer's block, it was an issue I had to be able to push through, and I could do that. I can't say that it was always my best work that came out on the other side of that. In writing things like this, I've got a number of friends who are authors that I've gotten to know over the last several years, and I read their stuff and they read mine. So I have this outside readers group, and I will say to them, I'm struggling right here. I'm not sure where to take this. And then I get ideas from people, and they say, well, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? And sometimes that's enough to kind of push you over the edge, but sometimes all you can do is just put it down for a little while, walk away, and then come back to it later and attack it fresh. How about research?
At the beginning of writing this book, I did have to do a lot of research, and I'm not a researching kind of person. But I did really need to go and investigate Chris's illness. I needed to dig a little deeper into that. I needed to see some other things. I needed to watch some YouTube. I needed to go do that. At this juncture of my writing and what I'm writing right now, I don't need a tremendous amount of research, because I'm not writing, some specific expertise thing. It's more from my heart.
I would say for me, I do a lot of research, partly because I like to do it, but partly because I want it to ring true, So one of the people is a psychologist. Well, I don't want to write about a psychologist and say things that a psychologist wouldn't say. So I do a lot of research, then I write some of that, then I got some psychologists to be outside readers for me and say, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? And now, I had spent some time when I first graduated from seminary at Pine Rest and worked there, so I knew a little bit about that, but there were things that was helpful for me to do some deep research on things like that. Plus, I like to read what other people have written about a situation, and so, to read C.S. Lewis, it inspires me to think like C.S. Lewis, to get that deep into things. And so I enjoy the research part of it. I can get lost in it too. I can use that as an excuse not to write. I need to do more research. So it's always a question of when do you stop? So how long have you been writing?
I would really say I've been writing my whole life, but probably only in the last 10 years do I feel like I have actually a teensy tiny bit been able to master it a little bit. And to allocate time and to allocate the energy that goes into writing. It used to stress me out, really, when I had to write something. It would be very, I'd get a pit in my stomach. I'm starting, they say writers write. So you just keep writing, and whether you have to toss it out, I guess you have to toss it out. But I think that makes, it allows me to get through that squishy, stressful part of the writing, of focusing energy and saying, okay, I've got to sit down and I've got to spend 2 hours doing this. I would resist doing that. So I want to start with the idea, with the word, with a sentence, and then that kind of helps me make sure that I can keep at it and keep getting better at it. And I do want to get better at it. And I think it's good and wise to have people around you that really can give you feedback in a powerfully positive way, not feedback that says, hey, that's just great, but feedback that really says you don't need, these many pages for describing that surgeon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want that kind of feedback.
Well, for me, when Carol and I sold the car business, I really had no intention of going into ministry at that time. We were going to buy another business of some kind, something smaller, something that wasn't going to be all-consuming of my time. And in the process of that, I thought, you know what, I should go back and finish college, because I had won Volvo's National Sales Award. They offered me a job in Chicago. It seemed like a good thing to do, so I dropped out of college and took that job. So I went back to Hope College, and I was taking classes. And at the time, I was pretty invested in my faith. It wasn't like we were heathens. We were youth sponsors. I was the chairman of the deacon at our church. But I didn't feel like I was somebody that could be a pastor. And a number of people at Hope College kept saying to me, you ought to consider that. So I went over to Hope College, laid out what I was doing. They looked at my grades, and they were a little concerned about a car salesman. And so they said, well, these classes are not really what we want you to take. We want you to take philosophy and psychology and Greek and writing and things like that. I was in a business curriculum. And so I went back across the street and got involved in that. And I had to take this creative writing class. And when I went to the first day of class, the professor asked me to stay afterwards, and I thought, oh no, here we go. You need to realize I failed the 9th grade, and I made it through high school, but by the skin of my teeth. And I did go to college, but never was great at it. And I sat down with him in his office, and I thought he was going to tell me, you can't write, you shouldn't be in this class or something. And he said to me, your comments today, they were fascinating to me. He said, borderline brilliant. I said, what? What did you say? And he said to me, you just have a great insight into writing. Where did you get that? I said, I have absolutely no idea. He said, well, how much writing have you done? I said, none. And he said, well then, don't go to this class. This class is a waste of time for you. He said, this is so basic. You're way beyond this. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't know grammar. I don't know any of that. He said, oh, that's beside the point. You don't need grammar. I said, well, I can't spell. He said, most of the great writers can't spell. He said, you're a writer. I want you to write. I want to do an independent study with you. His name was Jack Riddle, for any of you who know Jack. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Jack had on tennis shoes and blue jeans and a T-shirt, and he stood in his office with his foot up on the desk like this and talked to me the whole time. and he said to me, I want you to write a story. You're going to do an independent study with me. Go write a story, and when you're done, come back. I said, well, when do you want it? He said, when you're done. So I wrote a story, and I brought it to him, and he said to me, I was right. You're a storyteller. Now, that totally changed my perception of writing. I thought, well, if I didn't get the period in the right place or the comma in the right place, I since have learned all of those things, but he gave me the confidence to write. And in seminary, then I did more and more writing, and he was kind of a coach for me. And writing really is more of storytelling for me than it is trying to write a dissertation. So that's how I started.
Well, should we turn it over for some questions?
Yeah.
I want to see everybody out there. It's hard with these lights.
I will be glad to run the mic to you if you have a question, or if you think you can project, please feel free. Ron, you want the mic?
In today's society, when there are so many people who have such strong feelings about issues, you mentioned the thing about your cousin and your uncle who was gay. Do you ever wonder about how you're going to get blasted by someone for saying something that you really believe?
You know, I expect to get blasted. I first, let me say, it's been great to be here. This church is a wonderful church. I've gotten so much affirmation from people, but once in a while, people challenge you on things. That's their right, you know. I don't have to always be right. I have to speak from my heart and from what I think God is telling me, particularly when I'm in the pulpit. It's still intimidating to me to imagine that I'm going to get up and say, "Thus saith the Lord," and then finish the sentence. So it doesn't bother me when people question. Usually what I try to do is figure out why they feel the way they feel, you know. And all I can say is that it was such a blessing for me to work with the people at Baker. They were wonderful. They published that novel. I'm eternally grateful. It just came a point, though, where with this novel, I wanted to have the freedom to say what I wanted, and you're always going to have somebody who's going to disagree with you. The ones that I don't like are the ones who disagree and don't come to you face to face. So as long as somebody comes to me face to face, you can say most anything to me. How do you get published? Well, Mary, why don't you answer first?
I'll start. It's very simple. I went through a self-publishing process. The book is published through Westbow Press. It is a Christian self-publishing arm of Zondervan and Thomas Nelson. And so I started researching which kind of publishing companies were out there. I'm very much of an unknown. I did not want to go through a process of trying to find an agent, doing this and that, you know, shopping it around. I just decided to go that route. For the most part, I would say I'm 90% satisfied and happy with how we've worked together.
Yeah, I would say for me, The process was gradual. I did some ghostwriting for other people, did some commentary writing, did some things in small little bits and pieces for other authors, like sometimes people like Max Lucado or somebody like that will have questions at the end of their book. Well, they don't write those. They contract somebody to write those. And so I did some of that kind of contract writing, and got to know some editors and some other authors, and ultimately got a hearing. It's a very difficult process to get published. Most manuscripts get rejected. We are fortunate to live in the mecca of the Christian publishing world with Baker and Zondervan's here, and both of them are at least open to look at people's manuscripts, but they don't publish very many of the manuscripts they get. And so self-publishing is a pretty big deal nowadays, and a lot of times you can self-publish and have a bestseller because of the internet, because of the world we live in. If you look, for example, at The Shack got published first as a self-published book. He published about 100 copies. He did it primarily for his kids. Gave it to his kids and his friends. They couldn't sell it. And so he had a friend who had a bookstore. He said, just try to sell them and get whatever you can. So on the $2 book bin, they put a bunch of his books out there, and a publisher just happened to be on vacation and read that book and said, you know what, we could redo that and make it so much better. And most people don't know this, but one of the main characters in The Shack in the first version was Satan. Satan doesn't show up at all in The Shack the way it's written. Two guys joined with him, and they rewrote that book and self-published it, and it became a phenomenon. I think it sold 17 million. So publishing is an experiment. If any of you know Oprah, by the way, I'd love to mail her a book. I just can't get her private personal address. So if you know Oprah, would you see me afterwards? That's one way to make yourself publicly known. About 250,000 is what they say. If Oprah nods your book in her little book, about 250,000 in sales. So that'd be all right. I make 99 cents a piece.